In this video, we're going to talk about the two rules that you need to know about dashes on the ACT. It's very simple. Remember that even though it looks the same, a dash is not the same thing as a hyphen. A hyphen joins two words, like for example, the noun a grown up. In this case, this is a hyphen and not a dash. So let's jump into the rules. The first rule that you need to remember is that you can use a dash to interrupt a sentence with a hesitation or a break in thought. So this is something that you might see in very conversational writing or whenever the writer wants to expand on an idea. You must remember that the clause that precedes or comes before the dash must always be an IC. For example, in this sentence we have, "My hairdresser ruined my hair and she expected me to give her a tip." So this clause right here before the dash is an IC. The second rule is to use a dash to set off any explanatory elements in a sentence. If you've seen my previous video on commas, then you may know that when something is surrounded by commas, you know it can be eliminated because the sentence makes sense without it. Just like the information in between the commas can be eliminated, for example, like this. It's the same thing with dashes. So if you see something like this, the dashes are setting off an explanatory or in other words, additional information from the sentence. So everything in between the dashes is presenting additional information, meaning it can be eliminated. So let's look at an example. It says, "I hope I passed the test. It was 90% of my final grade, or I'll have to retake the class." So if we remove what's in between the dashes over here, then the sentence should make sense on its own. So I hope I pass the test or I'll have to retake the class. Since it makes perfect sense to remove that clause, we know that the dashes are used here correctly. Let's take a look at one more example. In this sentence, we have, since 1962, 22 million people, 3/4 of them women, in more than 30 less developed nations have obtained microloans. So when we see the dash in the question, we should first try to determine whether or not there is any information that is additional. So the point of this sentence is that 22 million people in more than 30 less developed nations have obtained microloans. The fact that 3/4 of them are women seems like it's just giving additional information. So I know right away to either look for this structure or this structure over here, because I know that these two structures set off additional information. So first I'm gonna look through the options to see if I have these comma option. Because C is the only option that fits either of these two things that I'm looking for, I know that C has to be the correct answer. Let's say you weren't able to determine that this information is additional. Then it's okay because there are still ways of eliminating the options. So option A is incorrect because we have a semicolon usage over here. We know that if we're using semicolons, we're separating two ICs like this. However, this part over here, since 1962, 22 million people, 3/4 of them women, this is not an IC, and neither is in more than 30 less developed nations have obtained microloans. So we know that option A is definitely wrong. Option B, we see a comma. So we have the dash here and a comma here. That means we have a combination of a dash and a comma, which never separates the additional information. So we know that option B is incorrect. It has to either be two commas or two dashes to set off an explanatory information or additional information. Option D is incorrect because if you remember from our first dash rule on expanding on an idea, the clause before the dash must be an IC. However, since 1962, 22 million people is not an IC. So we know that D cannot be the correct answer.